Welcome to this special Memorial Day Moving Panels one-shot. Instead of having a nerdy conversation, it's just going to be me today. I'm just going to share some thoughts on a comic book series that I decided to read, and I just want to talk about it here for Memorial Day. That comic book series is called Captain America: Theater of War. Now, this is a 7-issue chronicle. They are all individual stories. There's no overarching story arc or anything. It's really just following Captain America through various stages of military history. The issues were released between 2008 and 2009, and they tell a wide range of stories, and I'm going to get into each one of those separately. I really was drawn to this because it felt like a great way to really honor those men and women of our military who give us everything, who sacrifice everything, and some of them ultimately do give it all. And so I thought this was fitting, and we're just going to get through that. I love this. The story, there's even some of the stories that are based off of real soldiers. They do tell fictional stories, but they are inspired by and dedicated to actual soldiers, and I just thought it was great. So let's get started. Now, I wasn't entirely sure about the order. I tried to look up some of these release dates online. It was kind of hard to find. There was some discrepancies. So I believe this is the order that they were released. And that started with Operation 0 Point. So Captain America: Theater of War, and the story is called Operation 0 Point, which I believe was released in October of 2008. Now, this was the first one, and this one really is just a Captain America story. It does take place during World War II, but it's this story where Captain America finds out that the Germans essentially have flying saucers. The story is that there's this scientist who has found a way to kind of defy gravity, and so the Russians have created these flying saucers that have these disintegrating rays, very sci-fi. Cap even has to fight the villain, who is a general who has a robotic eye, and it's just, again, it's over the top. It's very sci-fi, very comic book, very Captain America. It's a good story, but it doesn't really get to the heart of what a lot of the later issues would eventually get to. So it's a great Captain America one-shot, but didn't quite get the feel of what the Theater of War stories eventually did. Next up, we have America the Beautiful, which came out in January of 2009 and was the first of 4 of these Theater of War that was written by Paul Jenkins. I did find out Paul Jenkins is British, which was kind of interesting, but he tells of all 7, Paul Jenkins' 4 are probably the best, and in my opinion, America the Beautiful is the best of all of them. So America the Beautiful actually has 2 stories in it, and they're stories about soldiers that Cap fought alongside who eventually earned a Purple Heart. Story number 1 begins with Cap arriving at Normandy. He finds a tunnel. He's told about a tunnel that has been excavated, and there's a skeleton. And Cap knows who it is. And so he proceeds to tell the story of Bobby Shaw. And Bobby Shaw is this kind of scared soldier. He doesn't think he's ever good enough and whatnot. And Cap, even as Steve Rogers during training, encourages him to just keep going and keep going. Well, then we reach D-Day. And at D-Day, Shaw's too frightened. He can't swim. So Cap pulls him along. Cap eventually gets him to shore. Cap really just talks to him and finds out that Shaw, when he gets back, he's going to find himself a home. He's going to tend to his mother. He's going to get a swimming hole so he can learn how to swim. And he's going to find a beautiful lady. And he asks Cap to actually help him find a girl. And Cap says, "I'll do that." Ultimately, Captain America ends up at the tunnel and he wants to radio in. He can't radio in. And he finds out that Shaw is somehow there. And he finds out that Shaw has just pushed through and made it there. And he sends Shaw back to tell them that the tunnel is there and to come back. And there's this great moment in which Cap is running towards the tunnel. He sends Shaw back, and Cap is saying, "Don't look back. Don't look back." And then he looks back and he sees that Shaw is running. And Shaw is running back. And he gets the troops. They get into the tunnel. I mean, obviously, as kind of alluded to in the beginning, obviously Shaw's going to die. And it's because of a grenade. Cap leaves him there and says, "I'll come back for you." And then as he's exiting the tunnel, Cap says, "Don't look back, don't look back." And he doesn't look back, and the tunnel explodes. And it's just this amazing story of bravery, and Cap just reminiscing about someone that he truly saw as a hero. Even though Cap does call him the worst soldier in U.S. history, he also says he's the bravest man I ever knew. And Cap awards him posthumously the Purple Heart. He even promotes him to sergeant. Then there's this great speech at the end, which I'll just let you read for yourself. It's a great story. I don't want to give away a lot of these today. I just kind of want to give the idea, but this one I had to talk about because, again, it really touched me, and I thought it was a great story. You find out at the end that the story is dedicated to J. Douglas Huggins, who was in the military, and his friend, musician second class Bobby Shaw. And you find out that Bobby Shaw, who the character was named after, didn't die at D-Day. He actually died on the Arizona at Pearl Harbor. But great story. That story then is followed by the second story in this one-shot, in which you meet a man by the name of Stanley Klein, and he tells a story to his great-grandkids about when he fought alongside Captain America. And then we go back into his story that he's telling, and it's during the Battle of the Bulge. We see the events that happen. I will say in this one, I got reminded that Nick Fury was actually in World War II. And in the comics, he was Sergeant Fury. And then they did a little, comic book trickery to allow him to really, not age, which is how he still exists in the present timeline. But pretty much Klein saves a man's life. He is awarded the Purple Heart. And this it means a lot to Stanley Klein that this has happened. Unfortunately, something happens to this now elderly man, and he spends his last few moments, luckily, with both Nick Fury and Captain America by his side. And it's just, again, another touching story. This, again, America the Beautiful is my favorite of the 7. I highly recommend giving those a read, even if I maybe have spoiled them a little bit for you, but take a look, take a read, take a moment for yourself. All right, now we're going to get into probably the one I disliked. I'm going to actually say disliked, not just like the least. I didn't like this one. It's called America First. And for those of you who are history buffs, yes, you know that America First, as I was told, is kind of a battle cry, a mantra for the American Nazis, the neo-Nazis, for Nazi spies back in like the 50s. Kind of reminded me of the one world, one people that the Flag Smashers say in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But this comic had 3 separate stories. One was new. The other appeared to be reprints. I didn't really look into it all that much because, like I said, I wasn't a fan of them. They actually tell the story of the 1950s Captain America, which, if you are unaware, was later retconned to say this was not Steve Rogers. Even though he is called Steve Rogers in the comic, he has Bucky. They found out later, in fact, it was in 2010, which would have been after this comic was released, they actually gave him a name, and his name is William Burnside. And you find out that he was obsessed with Captain America. He ended up doing some research and some searching, and he found a Nazi bunker that happened to have some of the super soldier serum in it. But unfortunately, the experiment that he went under to become Captain America, they were missing the Vita-Ray component that was essential to the process. And what they said was because of that, he becomes psychotic. And they later went into him being more of an evil character. Picking up with that Falcon and Winter Soldier, for those of you who watched that, kind of the same thing that John Walker goes through there, where the super soldier serum actually kind of messes with his mind a little bit. But it's a long story. You can look into it, of the fake Captain America. They tried to say he was in the 50s, but then in the 60s, they said, no, Cap's been frozen since 1945. And then they had to figure out, well, how do you explain the Captain America comics from the late 40s and the 50s? And this was one of the ways they explained it. But it's 3 stories. One is new, so it does get into a little bit of the revealing that this was a different Captain America. Fury even says, "You're not the real Cap," and all that throughout the story. And then there's 2 that appear to be just reprints, like I said, and one of them's just, that's so bad. So I don't recommend this one. I really don't. It didn't really make me feel patriotic or anything special. So it's got the Red Skull in one of the stories, and he's in this gaudy outfit. But hey, if you're a Captain America fan, you'll probably read it. If not, I can say skip it. Next up was another really good one. It was A Brother in Arms, released in June of 2009. This was actually the first one I read. And this one really hooked me in and said, okay, I want to read the rest of these. So this was a good one. It occurs around the same time as the Battle of Remagen, and I apologize for mispronounced that. I've heard it say a couple of different ways. The Battle of Remagen, which is where the Allied forces took control of the Ludendorff Bridge over the Rhine, a bridge that the Germans, the Nazis, built to be pretty much indestructible. And then when the Americans got so close, the Germans tried to blow it up. And of course, they made it too good that they couldn't blow it up. And eventually, the Allies took control over it. So even though this isn't happening during that battle, it's kind of going along parallel. Because like I said, these stories are fictional, but they try to give that same feel as to what was happening. In this story, the soldiers are defending the Rembrandtstoff Dam, and I tried to look that up, but apparently it's fictional, so I have no idea how I'm supposed to pronounce that. And in the process, they capture a German soldier, and what I did like was the comic makes it very clear through Captain America. In this comic, Captain America pretty much plays kind of the guy who knows all of the rules of engagement, who knows all of the laws behind war. And he makes it very clear to the other U.S. soldiers that there is a clear difference between a German soldier and a Nazi, which I don't know if I've ever witnessed anything that makes it that clear, how there is a clear difference. And they repeatedly let us know that there are 23 men that are in Cap's group. We do find out at the end that only 14 of them survive the incident. And the German soldier, unfortunately, as he is being returned to his commander, is actually gunned down by Nazis. And Cap says, I believe it's Cap at the very end, says a great line. He says, "Any good soldier, no matter your friend or enemy, is truly a brother in arms." Now, I will admit, this story is very formulaic. You have, for a war story, you have the soldiers that are struggling. You have like I just mentioned, the bad guy isn't always the bad guy. You have one soldier who just seems to refuse to accept that idea. But of course he gets softened up. And of course you've got the tragedy at the end that kind of separates all of that. But listen, as formulaic as it can be, this is an extremely well-told story with a lot of heart. And like I said, it was the first one I read when I was trying to find something for Memorial Day weekend, and it's what got me to go ahead and read the other 6 of this run of the Theater of War. Next up from August of 2009 is To Soldier On. This actually occurs during the Gulf War, so I think it's the most modern, other than a bit in the next one I'll mention. It takes place during the Gulf War. This is another great one that kind of really shows the story of a soldier. Even though Captain America is there, you get this soldier's point of view. Everything's told from the soldier's point of view. And it's the idea of, why are we here? Which is what a lot of people felt about the Gulf War and the Iraqi War and Afghanistan and all sorts of things. Why are we here? Why do we keep doing this? We're not welcome. They're not accepting our help. And then when Captain America shows up and he's trying to negotiate with everybody, this soldier is again like, so now we're just escorting around this guy, just to be a spokesperson. And he gets all into his head and whatnot. Then after an incident, Captain America has him and the other soldiers drive back to their camp, and an explosion happens. And the soldier who's telling the story actually loses both of his legs and one of his arms. And he blames Cap. And the rest of the story gets into how much he says, if it wasn't for Captain America, this wouldn't have happened to me. I'd be home. I would have, legs. I'd be able to walk. I'd be able to stand. He gets into all of that. And it really made me feel for those veterans that we have that come home and have that feeling of being different and sometimes even being treated different. And we should never do that. Ever do that. We also find out in this story that Cap blames himself. We learn also, with this taking place in the Iraqi War, or the Gulf War, Cap, of course, has been around since World War II. Cap even shares with this guy the fact that he has never forgotten any soldier that he has fought alongside. He knows all of their names. He knows everything that has happened to them. And a lot of that just lives with him. And it just, such a great story. Another one I highly recommend. I think this one was also written by Paul Jenkins, but it's a great one. The next one is Ghosts of My Country, which was, I believe, the last one written by Paul Jenkins. It was released in October of 2009. And this one's kind of interesting because it doesn't actually have Captain America as a character. It has Captain America as a spirit, as the ghost of my country. He's the spirit of what America is. And it goes through moments that start from the Continental Congress into the American Revolution, Vietnam, of course, World War II, and then it goes all the way into 9/11. And then we see various other little moments as it's coming to a close of where Captain America has been there. Paul Jenkins, I actually found that Paul Jenkins actually said this about the comic. When we see him and see his shield and his flag-based uniform, he is the sum total of all the most important and meaningful and mundane and intense moments throughout the history of the U.S. He is the personification of America. He exists throughout all of the most important moments of American military history. He was there. And he was there because the sum total of everything that was happening made him come alive. He is alive because of everything these soldiers did, and every American soldier brings Captain America alive. And once I read that, the story made a little bit more sense to me, because as I read it the first time, I was like, I don't quite get this one. And then when I read that, I went back, I reread some of it, and I said, oh, I get that now. It makes a lot more sense. And the whole thing centers around a poem. Each character, as we go through it, starting with the Continental Congress, and I can't remember which character says it. Then we get into Francis Scott Key, actually recites some of it. Then there's a soldier during the Civil War who says part of it. And ultimately it ends with a firefighter during 9/11 who says part of this as well. But they pretty much are quoting a poem. I say quoting. They're coming up with these lines. They're kind of saying it as a prayer. They're saying it as a thought that they're having. And what I'd like to do is I'd actually like to read how it all comes together. I hear a ghost of my country made real on this day in July. I am wrested from tyranny's clutches by the sound of its birthing cry. We are bound by a fair declaration of which I am a proud engineer. I hear a ghost of my country, 'tis the promise of all I hold dear. I hear a ghost of my country through the rain and the treacherous air, through the thunderous noise of the cannons, through the sound of the bugle's blare. I see a battery of angels that no rocket's red glare will obscure. The ghost of my country are calling, that my country will ever endure. I see a ghost of my country, in whose men it is clearly defined. With the glory of God to protect us, we'll stand and we'll hold to the line. Though we face the greatest of perils, we will never surrender nor flee. I see a ghost of my country, boys, and that country will always be free. I hear a ghost of my country, a specter of what we will be. It is born of our nightmarish actions. It is guided by hellish decree. It calls with a voice full of anger. It thrives on a message of hate. I hear a ghost from my country now. It's a voice that I helped create. I dream of a ghost of my country. I dream of familiar skies. Though our voices are silent, we still dream of home and 1,000 unspoken goodbyes. I see a ghost of my country. 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 I am a ghost of my country. Of my country I always will be. I have weathered the storms of my enemies in the name of the land of the free. I have tested resolve to its limit. I have slipped from my confines of earth. For all my days I have sworn to uphold the ideals of the place of my birth. I am a ghost of my country. Of my country I will always be. I am born in the heart of a nation, my sweet land of liberty. I dwell in the souls of the fallen. I breathe life into their just memory. I am a ghost of my country, and my country's a ghost of me. Look, if you like the poem, which, as I'm reading it, I'm just a mix of emotions there. When you pair that up with the visuals that you see drawn on that paper in those panels, it brings it so much more to life. And I kind of wish that was the end of this. They do have one more story, which was Prisoners of Duty in December of 2009. It goes back to just being another Captain America story, but it has a little bit more of a realistic feel. It opens with Captain America finding out that he has been captured. Luckily, they don't know they captured Captain America. He wasn't in costume, so they just think they have captured Private Steve Rogers. He's in a POW camp, which is inside of a castle, and they don't know he's Captain America. He meets a nurse who he finds out is American, and she's there helping the Germans, the Nazis, because her family is in the town that they are in, and she wants to protect them. And so Captain America plans an escape. So you've got this great drama with them being able to escape. And it also ultimately comes down to Captain America making a promise, like he did to Bobby Shaw in that previous one of I'll be back. I'll come back for you. He makes a promise that unfortunately he's not able to keep. And another just heart-wrenching story of what a lot of these soldiers do have to go through and what they have to witness and what they have to see. And ultimately, that's what I think the best parts of Theater of War do, is that they show us the heartache. They show us the sacrifice. They show us the mentality. They show us the agony. They show us the consequences of what a lot of the ultimate brave men and women of our military have had to face or will face or are going through. And so for today, for this Memorial Day, I just want to say thank you to everyone. And I just want to lift up every single person who gave the ultimate sacrifice for our country. Thank you. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.